What makes you happy? We started asking these questions a couple of weeks ago as we were looking at the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus starts the greatest sermon ever taught by giving us 8 statements that reveal the key, that show the path to how to be happiest in life. And he uses the word makarios. Makarios means to be blissfully happy, to have this self-contained happiness that doesn't depend on anything on the outside, doesn't depend on what happens around you. It just comes from making peace with God and then making the right decisions throughout your life. Now, I want to summarize today as we move on into something else. Jesus wants you to be happy. I believe that with all my heart, because this is the beginning of his message. The happiest people are. And then he gave us 8 ways to become the happiest people on earth. But there's some things to remember. Happiness is more big picture than it is selfie. We like to take selfies and focus on ourselves, but happiness is more big picture, the whole story of your life. Happiness is more ultimate than it is immediate. We live in this culture that just requires immediate gratification, and we can get sucked into thinking if I'm not happy right this moment, then I never will be. Well, it takes time. Sometimes you have to sow and reap, and that takes time. Happiness might take time as you learn to make these right decisions so that you live with fewer regrets. It's because happiness is more crock pot than microwave. It just takes time to stew. It takes time to all come together. But when you give it time, when you learn patience and do what's right and follow these instructions, well, then you're going to, as an end result, be happy. The truth is, happiness is something you reap, and it all depends on what you're sowing. The law of the harvest is what dictates how happy you are. If you are sowing good decisions and righteousness and meekness and a clear understanding of what it means to mourn and a clear understanding of what it means to put God first, all these statements, these 8 statements, if you are sowing those, then ultimately you will reap happiness. If you are sowing something else, ultimately you will sacrifice happiness. So your happiness is all about sowing and reaping, planting and harvesting. What are you planting? Whatever it is will determine whether or not you choose to be happy. Now, Jesus teaches this incredible lesson. He starts with 8. The happiest people on earth are those who, and then he gives us 8 very practical things that we can each learn to do in our life. And then he teaches, and towards the end of his message in Matthew chapter 7, he really narrows it down, and he makes probably the wisest statement that he makes in this whole sermon, and it's a beautiful sermon. You should read it. There's so much truth and hope in his sermon. He gets to the end in Matthew chapter 7, and listen to what he says. He says, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine," so in other words, all of you who have just been sitting here, and those of you 2,000 years later who have been reading this, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice. It's not enough just to hear the words of Jesus. It's not enough just to know what makes people happy. Jesus said, everyone who hears these words and then goes and does them, puts them into practice, is like a wise man who built his house on a rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew, beat against the house, and yet it did not fall because its foundation was sure and built on a rock. So the wise human being listens to the words of Jesus and then does them. No matter how awkward they are, no matter how difficult they are, no matter how challenging, no matter how foreign they are, a wise person will learn to do what Jesus says, to put his words into practice. In his closing statement, but everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice. You get a choice when you hear the words of Jesus. You can either do them or sock them away in your memory and not do them and go on living life the way you want to. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is a fool who builds his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, the wind beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. Why? Because its foundation was built on self, on sand, on seeking immediate pleasures instead of sowing and reaping for ultimate happiness. The key to a happy life is to put into practice the words you hear Jesus say. So, if you want happiness today, ultimate happiness, lasting happiness, self-contained, you'll have to hear what Jesus says, and then most importantly, you'll have to do what Jesus says. Put those things into practice. He wants you to be happy. So go and do and find yourself being